141 years after the Berlin Conference, what would be your opinion on why Africa is still being, exploited, yet we have independence?
In answering your question, I go to a statement made by Kwame Nkrumah in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. In that book, he reminds us that gaining political independence and even gaining economic independence perhaps was the easier part. That the impact of colonialism was so intense and so deeply seated and so very well designed that we were made to believe as Africans that we were inferior, and that we were made to believe that we were only good to the extent that we remained and retained umbilical connections with our so-called colonial masters. That is how Africa was then divided into spheres of influence. Remember, it was a scramble for Africa. So there was the Francophone. You are given French education, and your desire is to be a Frenchman or a Frenchwoman. You are given Portuguese education. Your desire is to be Portuguese. You are given British education. And British, I know, covers England and Wales, but you are made to think like an Englishman or woman, and you wanted to be an Englishman or woman. That is still there. And after that, what did they do? The colonizers recruited from within our ranks. In his book, Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe, using one of his characters, says the white man was very clever. He came and put a knife in the things that held us together, and things have fallen apart. And that is why we can still kill and maim for the colonial boundaries. So that we have Maasais in what is called Uganda and Tanzania. We have Luos in Tanzania and Uganda and Kenya. We have Somalis to be found in what is called Ethiopia, what is called Djibouti, what is called Kenya. And we can kill and maim for it. That is why.
Why is it so hard for Africa, especially countries that have natural resources, to manage their own resources, that we are still dependent on the West?
A number of reasons. First of all, the governance system that we inherited from the colonizers, and once again, it is us who have ensured. John Hendrick says, the great American Pan-African says, that when African countries became independent, all of them without exception inherited governance systems that were inherited from their former colonizer. None of them will ever succeed on the basis of those systems. And if you ever doubted him, just look at Africa as I speak to you now and see how countries are collapsing. Governance. We must have governance systems that are re-examined and rethought, so that we eliminate those things that do not serve us. Number two, the laws that we inherited. These laws did not allow us to create a legal environment that would allow us to trade and add value, coupled with education. So that the education that we have here makes us to believe that if we have gold, we mine gold, it must still be refined elsewhere. We mine diamond in Botswana and in Namibia, we still have it cut in Antwerp, and the price is determined in Antwerp. And then, of course, remember that the colonizer went but never went. In other words, they still have us with their institutions which are alive. I will not name them, but if you look at any sector, look at the banking sector, look at the insurance sector, look at the mining sector, look at the agriculture sector, look even at security sector where they are hiring watchmen in our own country and deploying them. Look at even the property sector, who is selling our property on our behalf here. Look even at the accounting sector. It is still them. So in many ways, the Africans at independence received the crown without the crown jewels.
How is colonial hangover affecting Africa in the current society?
It affects us in the manner that even during this interview, I'm being interviewed in English rather than in Kiswahili. That is the impact of it. So it requires undoing. And I permit me, if you may, to give examples. Look at little countries which have fewer people than many big African countries. Culture is important. You go to Denmark, the children are taught in Danish. Norway, Norwegian. Sweden, Swedish. Finland, Finnish. South Korea, Korean. Vietnam, Vietnamese. Indonesia, China. It is only in Africa where it is a badge of honor, and even intelligence is determined by the kind of English or French or Portuguese that you speak. Culture. We are culturally dominated. And that is why Ngugi wa Thiong'o, our very own Ngugi wa Thiong'o, says we must decolonize our mind. And even earlier than that, speaking about African Americans, Carter G. Woodson in 1933, having looked at the curriculum that was being used to teach the Negroes, talked about miseducation of the Negro. Many of us are miseducated, and it is our duty to unlearn some of the things in order for us to begin to do things that are in the best interest of Africa. There is an argument that sometimes I hear, particularly during this year when Africans are talking about reparation for slavery and colonization. You hear some European scholars saying that no, it is Africans who sold the slaves. It is Africans who did this. I say that that is balderdash. African communities, like others, were vibrant, and they had nations. They had big, successful nations, which some of them were involved in conflict. That is true. But the commercialization of slave trade and its use in the manner that we now know the transatlantic trade was first, of course, in the eastern coast of Africa, was by the Arabs. And then by the European powers such as Portugal and Spain and even Denmark, and ultimately the British and all these. They are the ones who commercialize trade. And that argument that Africans are the ones who taught them is without merit. The commercialization and dehumanization of Africans by the Caucasians in countries that are well known is something that was not given to them by Africans. Indeed, it was created and commercialized, and people were sold like commodities by the Europeans and by the Arabs. We seldom forget this. If you go to Zanzibar, you'll see how that was done by the Omanis in Zanzibar. And if you go to Dhaka, you'll see the point of no return. So it is without merit to say that Africans were privy to the kind of slavery that removed nearly half of the population of Africa at that time to the Caribbean and to the Americas, or the so-called new lands, and into Europe.
Finally, the best, like the 1, 2, 3 solutions that Africa can use to cut themselves from the colonial shackles.
Number one, Africa must very quickly move towards integration to allow for intra-African trade. 2, Africans must begin to allow for intra-African movement, free movement within the continent. Number 3, African countries must revamp their curriculum so that we are able to change how we teach and what we teach. Once we do all those things, and then, of course, deal with our culture and adopt a lingua franca that is universal without killing the other languages, it will ultimately lead to a single currency. If we do all those things, it will ultimately lead to integration, and we'll begin to move faster than we are at this stage.